Hey, thank you everyone for being here. Um, Hello and welcome to the Graduate Student Committee of the Medieval Academy of America's workshop on accessing archives and libraries around the world. I'm Maria Thomas, one of the organizers, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this workshop. As you know, this workshop is aimed at providing graduate students with tools and knowledge necessary to pursue research in archives and libraries globally. A huge thank you to our panelists, Valeria, Nicola, Maria, Alka, and Kevin, for being with us today and for sharing their knowledge and expertise. I would also like to thank the Medieval Academy for supporting this workshop. A special note of thanks goes to Chris Cole, who's with us today, who's helped us put together this Zoom webinar. We're grateful for your support and we're delighted to have you all here. So on to our program for the day. The workshop will feature 4 and not 5 presentations. Unfortunately, one of our speakers, Vera Simon-Schultz, is not able to join us. After all the 4 presentations, we'll have time for questions. Please feel free to type in your questions either into the Q&A box or the chat box on your screens at any point during the workshop. We'll make sure to bring them to a speaker's attention during the Q&A. So we'll have Valeria go first, followed by Nicola and Maria, and then we'll have Olga speak, and we'll end it up with Kevin. So before we get started, I'd like to invite Will, the current chair of the Graduate Student Committee, to speak a few words about the committee. Will, I see you somewhere.
Hi, Maria. Thanks very much. And hi, everyone. Yes, I'm Will, and as the current chair of the Graduate Student Committee, I just want to warmly welcome everybody to the workshop this morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. I don't want to take up too much time away from the wonderful speakers we've got lined up today, but I just want to take a couple of minutes to tell you a little bit more about the GSC and the work we're doing. So this session on accessing archives and libraries around the world is one of several workshops that we're running this year. We've already held a session on organizing your research, and we held our second Digital Humanities Showcase earlier this year. Later in 2024, we'll be doing workshops on writing grants and developing projects to expand the reach of medieval studies scholars. So keep an eye out for more information about these workshops as we continue to finalize the details. Aside from our digital presence, I also want to let you know that the GSC are running events at the MAA annual meeting at Notre Dame next month, at Kalamazoo, and at Leeds this year. We run conference mentoring programs matching students with scholars. We are also sponsoring graduate student panels at each of the conferences, so please do come and check those out. At Kalamazoo, we're currently planning a social event, and for anyone coming to the MAAs this March in Notre Dame, so in about, 3 weeks from now, we're going to have a graduate student social on Thursday the 14th at O'Rourke's Pub in South Bend, which is just south of Notre Dame's campus, about a 5-10 minute walk. On Saturday morning, there will also be a casual breakfast, which is also for graduates and scholars to kind of meet and chat. And that's going to be organized in collaboration with the MAA's Inclusion and Diversity Committee. I believe it's at 10 or 10:30 on Saturday morning, but all the information for these events is also in the programming. The podcast, The Multicultural Middle Ages, is going to be launching its 3rd season very soon and has been going from strength to strength. It's actually outgrown the GSC and has become its own entity within the MAA, but we continue to use it to promote the work of graduates. The call for submissions is concluded for this season, but if you have an idea for episodes, then please keep an eye out for our next call for submissions and go and listen to the latest episodes. We're anticipating dropping the next series in the next few weeks, actually. And of course, finally, please do feel free to get in touch with us. We like to use our newsletter to highlight graduate student projects and bring attention to major conference and grant deadlines. And if you feel like we're missing something, we'd really like to know. You can contact us via social media or via the email address gsc@themedievalacademy.org. That's everything from me. Thank you again, all of you, for joining us today. And thank you again to our panelists. Over to you, Maria and Andrea.
Thank you, Will. So with that done, let's head straight into the first presentation for the day. Our first speaker is Valeria Venecio. Valeria is a lecturer in the Department of Library Information and Archive Sciences at the University of Malta. She is now an international associate of the Malta Study Center and leads cataloging and research projects in Malta, Italy, and the Vatican Library. Her fields of research include the history of archives and institutions, Order of St. John and the Mediterranean area, archival cataloging standards, digital humanities, and more recently, colonial legacies in libraries and archives. Her most recent publication is a co-authored article entitled Pioneers in Maltese Archives and Libraries, People, Contexts, Institutions in 20th Century Malta in Archives and Records. He's also currently co-editing 2 book projects, one with Hilarious Talia on archives and emotions, and international dialogue, past, present, and future under contract with Bloomsbury, History of Emotion series, and another with Valentina Bugasi and George Said Zamed on the land and the cross, properties of the Order of St. John between center and periphery, under contract with Routledge Military Order series. Valeria, thank you for being here. Over to you when you're ready.
Thank you so much, Maria. It's such a great pleasure to be here. I would like to thank all of you organizers and colleagues as well for this wonderful event. I'm going to share my screen just now. Please let me know if it works. Should work. And that's it. So thank you very much for inviting me. My goal today is to discuss a little bit about navigating Italian state archives. I have to choose, a particular institution or holding institution to discuss about in these 15 minutes, and to provide a few tips for research as an archivist and also a scholar and, just a student up to a few years ago to all of the graduate students of the Medieval Academy of America. First of all, since I'm the first one, I would like to start with a very, very general definition that we can or we might, of course, challenge in our own career and our own life about what is an archive, at the end of the day. It is a complex, of course, of materials created or received by a person, a family, or organization, what we define as an archival creator, that might be public or private, and this is very important, when we approach a particular archival creator and an archive, because it might influence where the archival material is preserved, and produced in the conduct of their own affairs or business because of the enduring value then of this material, also as an evidence of the functions and responsibility of the creator itself. Now, before delving into the Italian scenario, archival scenario with these research tips, I just wanted to discuss a little bit about general archival research tips before, approaching a particular situation. What means archival research at the end of the day? It's a set of activities, a broad range of different activities to facilitate the investigation of documents or textual material and also other typologies of material produced by or about an organization, a family, a community, or an individual, not the archival creator. And it is always very important to understand, at least it was for me also as a student, how the archival creator functions or used to function in a way, which was the main role of this institution or family or an individual, in this case, the role, the function in a particular context, in a particular environment. So we have to truly understand which was the institutional history as well of the archival creator, which were the archival procedures used by the creator and involving also other agents in the production, preservation of the documents, of the archival documents, and also which were rules, procedures, and laws used by the creator itself. At the same time, it's extremely, extremely important to understand in which particular broader historical context this creator used to act. For example, in my own case, studying the Order of St. John, the Knights of, better known as the Knights of Malta, it was essential also to understand the peculiarities of this institution as an archival creator, but also to understand how much the broader historical context was in a way influencing archival procedures, rules, and regulations, to understand and also to identify, especially in cases in which we have in front of us a massive archival dispersion, how to move in these labyrinthic pathways, this meandering pathway. You know, many scholars define archival research as the most wonderful part of our own job, no? Joyful, almost addictive, and you feel like almost a vertigo when you delve into archival documents, and that's important. But then the question becomes how to maintain your own balance, and how to navigate this labyrinthic pathway in a way. So before approaching any research, you have to delve into the institutional history of the archival creator. You have to understand better also the broader historical context in which the archival creator used to act, and also how archives and holding institutions function today in a specific geographical and administrative context. No, how archives are organized in Italy might be completely different in France, in Spain, in England, and also beyond these shores, European shores. So you truly have to understand also which is the history of the holding institutions in a particular geographical place, and this is something that will completely change the archival scenario, and also the way in which you have to move in this labyrinthic pathway. At the same time, once you have, a general idea of where things are preserved, where documents are preserved, and how this, preservation map is in a particular geographical place, you have to identify also the appropriate, let's call them like this, archives, but not only archives, for your research. And there you have to delve, you have to use particular tools that we are going to discover a little bit today, especially today, the digital ones, and also, to try, and draw, a particular research pathway that you would like to follow. And you have to be ready also to change this pathway in due course. That's more than natural. That's the beauty of research at the end of the day. Why not only archives? As you might know already, as very, very young scholars, you have to understand that archival material is not only preserved in archives, in national archives, state archives, church archives. It is also preserved in libraries, as you can imagine, and also in museums, for example. And so it's extremely important always to understand, according to the history of a particular holding institution and also the archival creator you are researching about, where these documents might be. Again, just bringing on board my own experience about the Order of St. John, the documents produced by the order are scattered all around across Europe, let's say, not only in archives, holding institutions like archives, but also, for example, most of the bound material is today also preserved in many public and private libraries, for example, or in museums, just because of, different reasons, collecting mania and different situations according to the holding institution. As the last step, it's very, very important to understand how to access this historical material, both digitally and then physically, to conduct research online and on site. First of all, of course, my suggestion is to delve into all the digital tools that we have today at our own disposal, to have just, to build a general knowledge and idea about your possible research pathways. And then, of course, you have to contact specific institutions for your own research on site. Now, archival research in Italy, some tips, just my own tips from my own short, young experience in the field. First of all, I would like to discuss peculiarities and challenges also of the Italian archival scenario. First of all, as you might know already, there are so many complex histories, dialoguing together related to the pre-unification states in Italy. Italy was highly fragmented up to 200 years ago in different states with their own archival traditions, documentary traditions, with their own record-keeping systems, administrative histories, and also with different places of preservation. And even the administrative structure of our own state here in Italy today, for which concern archives, was very much more influenced by these, pre-unification history of the pre-unification states in Italy. So, for example, if you want to research about the Medici Grandachi, you know that you have to, analyze the historical material preserved in the different state archives located in Tuscany, taking into account as a point of reference, of course, the State Archive of Florence as the main, state archive of the region. So you always have to keep in mind, how different was the situation before the unification of Italy. Also, especially when you approach the actual, archival scenario. So, and also to narrow down your research, understand what do you want to search or who you want to search about. Now, we also, of course, preserve wealthy archival collections of different typologies, from public to private archives or libraries as well, from state to ecclesiastic archives. You also know that there is also in the Vatican City preserved the Archivio Apostolico Vaticano, and also the Vatican Library with an amazing archival section, always that can be, of course, accessed for different, typologies of research, also about the history of certain families, like the Barberini, for example. And so you have to be, to choose your own research context, and also sometimes to adopt a case study as your point of reference to navigate this, massive archival scenario. We also have, from the standpoint of the Italian peculiarities, this polycentric archival system. So we have multiple archival state archives all over the peninsula. And so also documents are also concentrated in these different archives according to the original provenance of these documents and the original archival creator. And also we have a plurality of holding institutions with diverse jurisdiction and juridical nature. For example, and of course, accessibility requirements might change. For example, certain family archives or private archives that are, we say, vinculated by the state, so they are supervised by the state, are today still preserved in the original location, but the accessibility requirements are different from a state archive. So you have to take always into account these dynamics. Now, delving into the research tools online at our own disposal, the first, online access that you might have, you want to search to delve and to understand what you are searching about in Italy, is the National Archival System, the Sistema Archivistico Nazionale. As you can see, you can also reach, I also provided the link to this particular portal. This is the main national portal guiding you through the different, informative systems of the different state archives, the different superintendencies, and also it offers the opportunity to navigate thematically, through certain thematic portals. For example, we have the Antenati portal related to genealogical research in Italy, and many others, another one about cadastral maps. Well, this is your first access to this, plurality of sources. Just, delving a little bit more into the state archives in Italy and their own, very, very rich and so diverse also collections. This is the most important tool that you want to use after the Sistema Archivistico Nazionale. This is the archival guide of the Italian State Archives. It is an amazing tool that was created more than around 40 years ago, and today is, of course, online. And it was the result of a very important standardization process made by incredible archivists, Italian archivists at the time, to try and find a way to produce a finding aid that could guide, users in such a diversity of records. Standardizing, let's say, the archival, material of each state archive in three main sections: the pre-unification states, the Regno d'Italia, and then another section, including from notarial records to cadastral maps and other non-state archives, family archives, acquired, donated, or, merged there for different reasons. when you go online, you might want to, navigate the hierarchical archival structure of each state archive to find, at least to identify the major fonts or series you might want to consult before going on site, and following the internal procedures of the reading room to physically access the record. You also have then individual state archive information system. So each state archive usually has one. This is an example I would like to show to you of the Archivio di Stato di Firenze, so the State Archive in Florence. And as you can see, you can navigate this particular, line tool according to, for example, the particular font archival font you would like to access. They are divided according to time frames, for example, or, according to a particular, theme. Sometimes you want to navigate, for example, according to the archival creator, what we call soggetto produttore, and you can navigate then on corporate bodies like institutions or organizations, families, individuals, or you might want thematically to navigate according to a particular historical and institutional context as well. So you can then click on top of this, font, standardized, form of the name for a particular font, and you get, all the essential information according to the international standards for archival description. This is, your first access to information before going on site. Again, another extremely important portal online is the one of the Archival Superintendency Information System. You might know that we have a superintendency for archives for each region, basically responsible for each region or more than one sometimes, with different competencies. And this particular portal offers you the possibility to navigate all of those sources that are vinculated, so supervised by the superintendency. And you might find here truly, everything. You might find documents produced by families, individuals, mostly private, not non-state archives. So very important families, individuals, organizations, preserved by the superintendency. Of course, the accessibility requirements, as I mentioned, might completely change because of the nature, and the jurisdiction on these archives that are still property of the archival creator, but thanks to the help of the state and the superintendency, they are accessible to the public, to the users. Now, this was my last, general tip. Once you consult these main portals, you already have, a general idea of what would you like to access and where. So you can then go on site, write first to the customer care service of a state archive, go on site, follow all the procedures in the reading room, and there will be always an archivist or a, specialized staff able to welcome you and to help with your research, to guide you in this amazing, archival scenario. Thank you very much for this, and good luck with your research.
Thank you, Valeria. I say thank you on behalf of everyone. That was a wonderful presentation, very interesting. And it's my pleasure to introduce the next presentation done jointly with Nicola Verrain and Maria Chronopoulou. Nicola Verrain is a PhD student at the École Pratique de Haute Étude. He is writing a thesis on the depiction of holy women in the painted churches of Venetian Crete under the supervision of Professor Ioana Rapti. He has spent 4 years at the Institut National d'Histoire de l'Art as a junior research fellow, and then worked at the Polytech Gabriel Millet as an assistant curator. He is currently teaching Byzantine art history at the Université Paris 1 Panthéon-Sorbonne. And our second presenter in this paper is Maria Chronopoulou. She is a PhD student in history of Byzantine art, specialized in illuminated Greek manuscripts of the Middle Byzantine period. She is also currently assistant curator at the Gabriel Millet Byzantine and Christian Collection in the École Pratique de Haute Étude PSL University. So welcome both of you, and have fun. This looks really interesting.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction and for inviting us to speak today. This presentation will be more focused on the case of archives for history of art and in particular Byzantine art history. It will be divided in two sections. First, I will present a bit my experience working in Italian archives for my research, and then there will be a more general presentation of several places in France that can be of interest for people interested in Byzantine history of art. And Maria Hunopoulou, my colleague, will present into more detail one of the main collections, the Collection chrétienne at the École pratique des études. For my thesis, I study, as you mentioned, the depiction of holy women in the painted churches of Crete. As you may or may not know, there are hundreds of small churches scattered in the Cretan countryside, a majority of which still have at least some of their original painted decoration dating between the 13th and early 16th centuries. Fortunately for me, a significant amount of the archives regarding the presence on the island are preserved in the Venice State Archive. All these documents have long been used by art historians, especially the notarial sources, which contain documents such as the will of painter Angelo Sacotandos, and they're very, very valuable to help us understand the complicated topography of devotion and the interactions between the Greek and Latin communities on the island. But since these documents are already well known and well published, I will not be focusing too much on that today. And I will speak mostly about another type of source that is becoming more useful for historiography in particular and for current research in art history, that is the personal papers of early 20th century scholars and the photographic collections that you may find across Europe and in France. One of the main obstacles I faced working on the churches of Crete is the lack of documentation. Only some of the monuments have been published in detail, and most of these monographs or articles offer only a partial coverage of the painted programs, especially excluding the images of saints that I was looking for, as they tend to be considered less interesting than the scenes of the life of Christ. My main issue was with the unpublished churches, and this is where archives become interesting. When I say that these churches are unpublished, it's a bit of an exaggeration. Most of them are mentioned in a 1935 article by scholar Giuseppe Geola, who was sent to Crete by the Venetian Institute of Science, Letters and Art between the year 1900 and 1902 in search of all extant traces of Venetian heritage on the island. The majority of the material he gathered was published in 4 volumes that are still the basis of any work on Venetian Crete, but the painted programs of Greek churches occupy a minor section of the book. His 1935 article somehow corrects this. In this article, Geola published a list of 809 churches, where he saw at least some traces of wall paintings, some of which are now lost. All of these churches are given a short description of roughly 2 lines, usually an enumeration of the subjects he could identify. I figured that since Geola was able to write this article years after the publication of his main work on these monuments, in which most of these churches are hardly mentioned, he must have consigned the information about the wall paintings somewhere. And perhaps there was even more data that was left unpublished. Geola's archives are kept in several institutions across Italy, mostly in Venice, where his photographic archive is kept in the institute that commissioned his research in the early 20th century, and in Trento, on the Fondazione Biblioteca San Bernardino, where his personal archive was bequeathed by his family in the 1980s. Fortunately for me, an inventory of the Trento archive was published online in 2020, in which the content of every box was described in detail. A scholarship from the French School of Archaeology in Rome enabled me to spend 10 days in Trento, where I was able to visit the library. This place is run by the Franciscan Order and is therefore quite different from other types of archives that Valeria mentioned earlier, like state or city archives. There was no limit to the number of documents I could request for consultation, while many other Italian institutions have a very strict communication policy. This is crucial information that needs to be verified ahead of visiting any archive. The amount of time you need to spend somewhere will be very different if you can only see a handful of documents per day, or if, like me, you're fortunate enough to have 20 boxes brought to you at the same time with all the time to look through them. Another element to take into consideration is whether or not you are allowed to take photographs of documents. Again, permissions may vary greatly. Until recently, it was not possible to take photos in many Italian archives, which meant you had to plan for enough time to transcribe the documents you needed. And in some places, digitization is possible upon request, usually at a cost that may vary between a couple of cents to dozens of euro per page. And this is also something that should be looked into before visiting the archive. And this is something that could be covered by funding and scholarships. Planning ahead is therefore absolutely necessary. And it includes contacting the institutions you wish to visit, preferably in the local language. In many places, a letter of introduction, a resume, and a research statement, while not mandatory, might be useful to open doors for you. Once you have accessed the archive, you need to make time to sift through the documents you have in front of you. This might be very time-consuming. In Trento, it was only after I went through 5 entire boxes of documents that I finally found what I was looking for. I knew that these first boxes would not be very helpful for my interests at that time, but I did take the time to look through them. You never know what you might find and how it might be useful for your later research. So if in doubt, it's always better to have a little too much documentation than not enough, and make your selection later on, rather than go back home and realize that you forgot to photograph several documents that you actually need. Once you find the documents you need, I would recommend, if possible, to take photos and make sure that you save them in multiple places to minimize the risk of loss. You may then start working on the transcription of the archives, for which specific software might be useful. And here I will mention briefly Tropy, which I think is the most commonly used tool by researchers whom I know at least doing significant work with archive documents. It's a free open source knowledge organization application that allows you to sort your photos into several collections, as you can see on the screenshots that I have here. You can also describe them with metadata and make detailed annotations. One last recommendation, once you have completed your work in the archive, is to decide what to do with it and when. After coming back from Trento, I realized that the notebooks that I found, which amount to about 400 pages, meant too much distraction for my thesis, and that it might be better to save that for another research project, hopefully in the near future. You should always be aware of the significance of the processing of the archives and how much that will benefit your work. Research-based work in archives and libraries can take many forms, And new fields of exploration are opening up to scholars of medieval art, of which I will present a few examples before my colleague Maria Pronopoulou presents you the Gabriel Millet Photographic Archive in more detail. As Byzantine art history entered its second century as a university discipline, its history needs to be investigated. This historiographical work can be supported by the analysis of the personal archives of art historians, which are increasingly becoming available in many institutions. In France, the main repository for such archives is the library of the National Institute for History of Art, INHA, which currently holds over 160 archives of art galleries, art dealers, and scholars, several of whom might be of interest for art history. The archives of important medievalists such as Charles Dille, Louis Réau, Louis Grodecki can be found there. Of particular interest for Byzantinists is the recent donation of the personal archives of Michel and Nicole Thierry, who dedicated their careers to the study of monuments of Cappadocia and the Caucasus, which represents roughly 100,000 photographs documenting 60 years of research on the field, which is currently being catalogued and digitized under the supervision of Dr. Svana Chakarian, who unfortunately could not join us today. Another field of investigation for scholars is the materiality of monuments and artifacts. While conducting technical analysis might be difficult, several institutions in France store the records of all the restoration and analysis performed on historical monuments and artifacts in the country. I listed a few examples here, such as the Médiathèque du Patrimoine and the Centre de Recherche et de Restauration des Musées de France, all located in or near Paris, and which are the most important ones. As these analyses and restorations are considered public data, they may be consulted by researchers upon request. We do not have the time to explore these sources into further detail today, but if those are interest to you, you can find more information about where to find them using the database calam.abes.fr, which brings together all the archives regarding higher education in France, and more information will also be found on the website of the National Archives. But without further ado, I will now let my colleague introduce one of the major archival collections for Byzantine art history in France, the Photothèque Gabriel Millet. Maria.
Yes, I will share my screen. Do you see my screen? Okay. I will put you away because I cannot see. Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Nicolas. I will present you briefly the Photothèque Gabriel Millet, or as we say it right now, the Centre Gabriel Millet, and its Christian Byzantine collection. I will present actually the founder, Gabriel Millet, a brief history of the acquisition of different items of the collection, and especially the photographic items, and a brief history of the collection, the establishment of the collection, and then I will present you some of the items that we possess. So Gabriel Millet is one of the founders of the Byzantine art history and archaeology as an academic field in France at the turn of the 20th century. He was hired at the French School of Athens in 1891 and appointed to the École pratique des hautes études as a professor of Byzantine Christianity in 1899. The culmination of his career was his election to the Collège de France in 1926 and the Académie des Inscriptions et Belles-Lettres in 1929, the highest academic distinctions in France, which greatly contributed to strengthening the field of Byzantine studies. Thanks to the many scientific missions, Gabriel Millet managed to photograph a great number of significant sites of the Byzantine world in the Balkans, notably in Greece, such as the Byzantine city of Mistra, the monastery of Daphne near Athens, the monasteries of Mount Athos, also in Serbia, like the monastery of Studenica, or the more northern Macedonia, like the Neresy Church, all in the former the former territory of the Yugoslavia. Turkey was also a territory that Gabriel Millet visited, like, for example, the Trebizond or Constantinople and many others. He also collected a great number of photographs from other researchers, such as the Russian art historian Nikodym Kontekov, or the French art historian Guillaume Zerfagnon, or photographs like the Georgian Dmitry Ermakov. As a result, his photographic archive is one of the biggest and most important in the field of Byzantine art history and archaeology. Taken and collected at the end of the 19th century, or in the first decades of the 20th century, and enriched, of course, during the 20th century, Gabriel Millet's collection is a photographic heritage archive that shows monuments and objects in their earliest photographed form, some of which have disappeared, been restored completely, or completely unaltered since. Therefore, the importance of these photographs is both scientific and heritage related. The Christian and Byzantine collection of the École pratique des hautes études by Gabriel Millet was officially founded in 1903 and grew progressively through donations from Byzantine scholars, as we said, researchers, travelers, and institutions. In 1935, a donation agreement formalized the transfer of the Millet collection to the École pratique des hautes études. In 1988, the photographic library was relocated to the astronomy tower of the Sorbonne, Rue Saint-Jacques in Paris. In 2008, the Common Documentary Service of the École pratique des hautes études was established, which includes the Gabriel Millet photographic collection. And in the 2011, the collection was relocated to the France building in the 13th district of Paris. And then in the 2013 to the Collège de France Sainte Barbe library. Finally, after all these peripecias, in 2019, the collection found its last home at the Humathèque at the Condorcet campus in the city in the north of Paris, which is called Aubervilliers. In terms of quantity and material, the majority of the collection consists of photographs. 129,700 in total are photographic items, including glass plates, flexible supports like acetates, nitrates, films, paper print, photography shots, slides. Additionally, graphic works and art objects such as casts, paintings, watercolors, drawings, and engravings and plans are also presented in the collection, showcasing its wealth and versatility. It also contains 2,000 printed books, which are located in the library of the Umatec. Thanks to the current curator of the collection, Professor Ioana Rapti, significant progress has been made towards the study, digitization, improvement of the collection. Through the PSL Explore program, the collection has been partially digitized, and a significant amount of glass plates have been identified scientifically described and then published online. The move to the campus Condorcet provided the collection with a better and more spacious conservation environment. Currently, efforts are underway to inventory a number of glass plates and albums with paper printed photographs that have never been inventoried before, and to enrich, of course, the metadata as to better identify the photographic objects within the glass plates, flexible photographic supports, and paper printed photographic shots. Ioana Rapti also aims to digitize within the context of a publication supported by the French School of Athens, the graphic and art documents of the Christian and Byzantine collection, created during the Gabriel's Greek years, that his years as a member of the French School of Athens, and of course created during created by photographs and created during his missions in Peloponnese, Macedonia, and Attica and Mount Athos. Conversation about restoration and digitization of this part of the collection are on their way, and promise a larger visibility and of the collection in France and the international. So if you want to find us, we are in this address, and if you want to consult our collections, you can contact the director and curator of the collection, Ioana Rapti, and myself. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Nicola and Maria. That was fantastic. We'll quickly move on to our next presentation. We have Alka Patel with us. Alka Patel is a professor in the Department of Art History and in the PhD program Visual Studies at the University of California, Irvine. She received her PhD from Harvard University. Patel's research is focused on South Asia and its connections with Iran and Central Asia, including overland and ocean maritime networks. Her works include building communities in Gujarat, architecture and society during the 12th to 14th centuries, communities and commodities, Western India and the Indian Ocean, for which she was a guest editor of a special issue of Ars Orientalis. Patel also guest edited Archives of Asian Art, a special issue on reuse of South Asian visual culture. Patel's interests have expanded to include mercantile networks and architectural patronage in the 18th and 19th century South Asia, as evidenced in Indo-Muslim cultures in transition, co-edited with K. Leonard for Brill. Her recent volume, India and Iran in the Longier, for Brill and Jordan Center for Persian Studies, co-edited with ancient Iranist Taraj Diary, resulted from an international conference convening a wide array of specialists analyzing Indo-Iranian connections over 2 millennia. Her current monograph project on the Gurats of Afghanistan and North India comprises 2 volumes, the first of which was published in late 2023. Alka Patel, thank you for being with us. Over to you whenever you're ready.
Thanks very much. I really appreciate this opportunity. Let me share my screen first, I guess, and then begin. Sorry. Okay, so hopefully this is all visible and I am audible, right? Okay,
Yes.
I'll take that as a yes. Oh, there you are. Thank you again to Mariah Thomas and the whole graduate student committee for inviting me to this event. In fact, I feel like thus far I have learned probably a lot more than what I will be contributing. And as I've listened to the other presentations, I must confess some of the limitations, I think, of my own, in part due to perhaps the different type of material that I tend to focus on. And so even though this presentation might end up being a little bit anecdotal, I really hope that I can be of more use, perhaps, in the discussion period that I'm assuming we'll have time for towards the end. So I believe my area of research focus was listed as South Asia, and I did want to define that the way that I see it and deploy it also in my teaching and research, as is to be understood in virtually all parts of the world. The actual region encompasses many, many of the modern nation states, which now have fixed boundaries, but indeed historically had in themselves multiple historical cultural regions. So furthermore, despite these modern, very rigid boundaries, in fact, all of these historical cultural geographies were deeply intertwined. And so they require actually research beyond all kinds of political frontiers in order to access historical processes. And yet I have to point out from the beginning that really access to extremely relevant archives, and we will get to how we define archives, as Valeria brought up at the very beginning. Nevertheless, access to these archives, no matter how critical they are, in fact, can be quite dependent on the accident of birth. I, for example, would have greater difficulty entering into Pakistan than would some of my colleagues who were not born in India, and vice versa. So rather than pontificating, I do want to point out that this actually creates underlying inequities in terms of inequities, I should say, in terms of getting one's work done. And most importantly, perhaps, it underscores how important it is to share the findings, the materials that we gather. And I'll say a little bit more about that later. As I mentioned, I believe there is an important point to bring up, which is the very definition of an archive, as Valeria brought up in the context of her presentation previously. I should actually, I think based on my own work, desire to expand this definition perhaps tenfold. For one thing, to highlight the fact that defining an archive is very much a field or a specialization specific kind of exercise. After all, depending on the parts of the world and the time periods that any of us works in, we come up against questions or limitations even of the sheer quantity of available materials, which varies according to the archival practices around the world and at different times. So that singular term archive is actually quite beguiling in that there is not a singular way of gathering and classifying information that creates bridges between pasts and presents. In fact, there are multitudinous ways in which archives are created. And of course, location and access are intertwined. I just mentioned the problems besetting South Asia born scholars of South Asia itself, in that visas are required, which can be a very, very difficult negotiation, both within the overall region of South Asia to cross one political boundary to the next. And of course, it presents additional problems for those who still have South Asia-based citizenship in order to access Occidental collections. Now, again, one could say that there are advantages and disadvantages in this aspect accruing from, again, this accident of birth. I should also emphasize that where I'm coming from, and this thus far seems quite different from the presentations I've heard so far, my own research focus is specifically architecture as an object in the broadest sense, which is a primary source, if you will, that permits unique access into history's contexts and the receptions of these objects. So my working definition of archive would be vastly different, perhaps, than my colleagues who work in textual cultures and various other cultural formations. I should also definitely underscore what was said in the just preceding presentation on Byzantine studies, that the backup of images is absolutely crucial. Perhaps I can again underscore that 50 times over because of issues of access. Many places I know I had the good fortune to get to at a certain point in time, as you'll see momentarily, but within my lifetime, I most likely will not be able to go again. So the backup of these precious data is actually something that cannot be overemphasized. It's something that repeatedly should be kept in mind for all of us, I think, and perhaps especially for those of us working in certain global regions. Turning to architecture and showing some examples of places where, or at least cultural and historical geographies where I have worked for past as well as current and future projects, architectural documentation in India is perhaps somewhat straightforward compared to regions adjacent or contiguous regions such as Afghanistan and, of course, farther away in Iran, which has also been central actually to tracing historical processes, as I said. And so South Asia as an entity is very, very permeable in terms of not only its boundaries, but indeed, perhaps even more so, the relevance of materials that perhaps today might fall outside of traditional disciplinary boundaries as well as political boundaries. So, of course, doing archival research of the type that I am referring to, which is architectural documentation, there is the need to apply for permits from the local offices of the Archaeological Survey of India. But interestingly, these structures often have multiple jurisdictions that can even be quite antipathetic towards each other. Antipathic, perhaps, is the adjective, in that mosque structures as well as other types of sacred structures are both under the umbrella or jurisdiction of the National Archaeological Survey, but then also there are local confessional communities that claim to have their own jurisdictions over them and can actually intervene in terms of the applications of national laws. For instance, women are often, well, sometimes, shall I say, not permitted into certain parts of sacred complexes. And this actually is not governed by a national kind of code of access, but is very much up to the local communities who also have a very vested interest and therefore valid, to them, very much valid reasons for granting and denying access. I've also done extensive fieldwork in Iran in 2011, and I'm very grateful to have been able to do so because currently I do not believe that or really it would be recommended for anyone to try and gain access to the border regions, especially within Iran. And as many of you know, there is also the issue of trying to negotiate the US-Iran state of the relationship. I underwent a long lecture from my university as I was preparing to conduct this fieldwork, even having obtained the visa. Nevertheless, I was sent through kind of an intense on the phone training by some of the university representatives saying that the use of even foreign-made technology was forbidden, and so forth. So more on that, if necessary, during the question answer session. And yet another place or region which definitely encompasses multiple geographies is the nation state of Afghanistan, of course, which actually has very deep and long historical ties with the Indic cultural world, situated as it is, basically half belonging within the cultural realm of the Indic traditions and the other half within the Iranian or Persianate traditions. But again, this is a region that is becoming increasingly less and less accessible. And so I feel very, very fortunate that I was able to do firsthand archival research in my definition when it was possible. And now, of course, it is no longer so. This actually is a perennial problem, even when parts of regions are perhaps accessible during specific windows. And one of the ways that we as scholars who work on these volatile parts of the world negotiate these kinds of changing accessibilities is, of course, by collaborating. And one major aspect of this, just to explain, sorry about the fuzzy image, but it is a blown up, but still not high enough resolution satellite image of the southwestern corner of the country of Afghanistan, on which I have an ongoing project. And the last time that any actual field work or archaeology was done was, of course, prior to the Soviet invasion of 1979. So satellite imagery at least makes remote study possible, but we shouldn't be too distracted by these newfangled technologies. In fact, it is with satellite imagery only in combination, in fact, with what is termed legacy data, that much of the necessary information has to be gleaned. On the upper left, you see an overall view of what remains of the satellite image structure that I showed in the previous slide. And here you see photographs from the 1930s and then a later visit by a photographer in the 1950s. And already with the degradation of the structure, in fact, it was necessary to compare both sets of photographs in order to try and decipher the inscription that remains on the two standing piers. Incidentally, these images, particularly the large one in the middle, is an example of the need to access far-flung, perhaps unpredictable archives, in that the image that you see here captured in the 1930s actually lives in photographic form in Paris at the Musée National des Arts Asiatiques Guimet. And it is not easy to access the archives down in the basement. When I was recently at INHA, I'm sorry I missed you, Nicolas. In fact, the main project for me had been to try and consult these extremely valuable photographs from the 1930s captured by the Délégation archéologique française en Afghanistan, DAFA, to its friends. And while these images are beautifully archived, they actually are not digitized and therefore accessible only in person. So this did require a grant to digitize these images so that at least myself and my colleagues could study them and put them together with the satellite imagery data to create a plausible history of this immense richness of archaeological remains in the southwestern corner of Afghanistan. Finally, I did want to say that the sharing of archives, I think, is key. We are, or I am, of a generation where I underwent the transition from hard copy images, whether they were photographs or slides, into digital images. And it was a painful transition, but one that had to be made, not only for myself, but also in order to be able to share more widely the photography, the documentation that I had been fortunate enough to undertake in regions that really kind of change over time in terms of who can go there and what kind of work can actually be done. So let me then conclude. Actually, I've already concluded and stop the screen share. Thanks very much for having me once again.